The relationship between the University of Chicago and the people of the Czech Republic is over a century old. It dates back to 1901 when Charles Crane traveled to Prague to meet Professor Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and to invite him to lecture at the University of Chicago. Over the summer of 1902, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk delivered 13 lectures at the University of Chicago. He got an important opportunity to introduce the Czech question for the first time in the United States. On his tour for Czechoslovak independence through the United States, Masaryk was greeted by 150,000 people on Michigan Avenue. Once again, he returned to the University of Chicago to deliver an important lecture. Charles Crane has been providing funding for Masaryk's political efforts and even helped in gaining the approval from the Russian government for forming the Czechoslovak legions. Charles Crane was an important supporter of President Woodrow Wilson. With the assistance of his son Richard, who was secretary to the U.S. Secretary of State Robert Lansing, he helped Professor Masaryk to meet the U.S. President. The meetings between Masaryk and Wilson paved the way to the U.S. recognition of Czechoslovak independence. The distant dreams of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, his closest friend and colleague Edvard Beneš, and their supporter Charles Crane becomes reality. Professor Masaryk receives a triumphal welcome to Czechoslovakia as the country's first president in December 1918. Richard Crane became the first U ambassador to Czechoslovakia. John Crane became a personal secretary to President Masaryk. Josephine Crane Bradley, the daughter of Charles Crane, was depicted as Slav goddess on the 100-crown bill. The warm relationship to the United States can be felt in the messages of the first two Czechoslovak presidents to the American people.
Good morning. A fine day after the Fox on the last week. And I see the new film. As yet I didn't see and hear it. A great invention of America. I'm sure not the last one. The Europeans can learn a bit of you Americans. Goodbye and thanks you.
I have been since my student days an admirer of your great and beautiful country. Your struggle for freedom, your material advance, and your intellectual development, the growth of your democracy and your political regime taught me how modern freedom was created.
After Masaryk's passing in 1937, his successor, Edvard Beneš, had been facing a growing threat from Nazi Germany. Edvard Beneš accepted the offer to serve as professor of sociology at the University of Chicago. He came to the university under the auspices of the Charles R. Walgreen Foundation. On March 16, 1939, Nazi Germany annexed the whole territory of the Czech lands. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. At that moment, Edvard Beneš decided to speak again on behalf of Czechoslovakia as its lawfully elected second president. He immediately formed the first provisional political center of Czechoslovak resistance called foreign action. His University of Chicago salary became an important initial source of its financing. On March 19, 1939, he delivered a famous address to the American people.
Edward Beneš, former Czech president at the Chicago University Roundtable, says the Republic still lives.
But I declare that the independence of Czechoslovakia was not crushed. It continues, it lives, it exists. And until my last breath, I shall continue the fight for the freedom of my people and for their rights. And I am sure that my nation will emerge from this struggle, as it has done many times before in its history, as brave and as proud as she has been throughout the past.
Already at the end of April 1939, in a Chicago meeting, Czech and Slovaks of America agreed to form a new combined organization, the Czechoslovak National Council of America, to support the battle for the recreation of Czechoslovakia. Czech and Slovak Americans contributed by donating $15,000 every month. Edward Beneš met with President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Beneš recalled that President Roosevelt received him very warmly and greeted him as Czechoslovakia's president. Roosevelt added that for him, the Munich Agreement does not exist and that Beneš continues to be president.
They do not doubt that this great struggle, in which the United States are playing so decisive a role, will end with one of the greatest victories in your and our national annals.
World War II is over. Czechoslovakia is restored. Democratic traditions continue to live on at the University of Chicago. Just as during the Second World War, the University of Chicago placed many refugee scholars in positions not just in its departments, but in universities throughout the United States. The university also extended help to students. The club called upon the U.S. Congress to admit Czechoslovak students into the United States and attempted to unite the Czechoslovaks in exile. It also continued to organize lectures and various cultural events, including the celebration of the Masaryk Centennial. The Blahnik Knight statue by Albin Polášek was erected on the Midway Plaisance on the university campus, reminding us of the special tie between the University of Chicago, President Masaryk, and the Czech nation. The University of Chicago, along with tens of thousands Czech Americans and numerous Chicagoans, stood by the Czech nation for more than a century. Thank you. Welcome to the inaugural evening of Czech Series, celebrating the University of Chicago's unique contributions to Czech statehood and honoring Czechoslovak presidents Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and Edvard Beneš, University of Chicago visiting professors.